The luxury restaurant was brimming with glamour, a night of pure sophistication and eternal promises. What began as a wedding anniversary filled with smiles would turn into a true battleground, where Emma's life would hang by a thread. An apparently harmless shrimp would become the first blow of a plot. Are you ready for a story where poisonous betrayals and unexpected acts of courage shake even the strongest heart? Ashley was one of those invisible figures, a domestic worker who spent her days amidst white sheets and impeccably clean hospital floors. Her world had no room for luxury. It was a sea of repetitive routines, but she clung to her inner strength with determination. Emma and Jonathan, a millionaire couple with lives filled with expensive dinners and mansions that seemed straight out of magazines, could not have been more distant from that reality. However, fate had a curious way of intertwining these very different stories. The couple was at a sophisticated restaurant, celebrating another wedding anniversary. Emma wore an elegant blue dress, trying to hide the discomfort she felt in the face of the rehearsed perfection of her life. Jonathan, always impeccable and smiling, maintained the pose of the ideal husband. There was something that night, a subtle discord, as if a storm was about to break. But for now, the atmosphere was one of celebration, and no one dared to imagine the drama that was about to erupt. Jonathan and Emma, enveloped in their worlds of appearances, had no idea that their lives were on a fragile line. The luxurious environment was a perfect mask for hidden problems. But as they say, not all that glitters is gold. Emma had always felt an inexplicable void, a sense that something was wrong, but how to talk about it without destroying the impeccable facade. And so, the night continued, like a spectacle about to collapse. At the hospital, Ashley was cleaning an emergency room, glancing at life and death stories. She was always absorbed in thoughts about her younger sister and the bills she needed to pay. Her heart was big, always willing to help, but no one expected that this willingness would soon be put to the test. After all, she was just a domestic worker, right? Little did they know that life didn't care about titles or positions. When chaos calls, anyone can be a hero. And that night, fate had chosen Ashley, even if she didn't know it yet. Emma and Jonathan toasted with champagne as the first signs of disaster began to unfold. Emma felt a slight discomfort in her throat, as if something was wrong. She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. Everything was fine, right? Jonathan cracked a joke, and laughter echoed through the hall. But Emma's unease did not disappear, it was only beginning to grow. Something terrible was approaching, and no one could ignore it for long. Emma's hands began to tremble, and the shine in her eyes dimmed like a flame about to be extinguished. The discomfort turned into panic, and an inexplicable chill ran down her spine. In seconds, the relaxed atmosphere of the restaurant was replaced by a suffocating tension. Laughter ceased, and eyes turned to Emma and Jonathan's table. A woman who seemed so secure and strong was now vulnerable, almost on the brink of collapse. Jonathan shouted for help, but the desperation in his voice revealed the fear he had long concealed. That night, which promised to be a milestone of love, was turning into a nightmare. People around were paralyzed for a moment, not knowing what to do. Waiters rushed, and the manager tried to maintain order, but it was clear that no one there was prepared for such a serious emergency. Emma could barely breathe. The panic in her gaze was a silent plea. Jonathan held her hand tightly, trying to comfort her, but feeling the situation slipping through his fingers. The entire restaurant held its breath. The restaurant staff acted quickly, calling for medical emergency, but every second felt like an eternity. Emma, increasingly weak, struggled not to succumb to the fear taking over her body. The bitter taste of shrimp was still in her mouth, a cruel reminder of how it all began. Jonathan, on his part, tried to calm Emma, but his own face was marked by terror. The perfection of his carefully built life was shattering before him. Emma was rushed to the hospital, her fragile body being transferred from the ambulance to a crowded emergency room. Doctors and nurses surrounded her bed, voices blending into a whirlwind of medical terms and quick orders. Outside the room, Ashley watched, still wearing her uniform, her gaze fixed on the chaotic scene. What could she do? Who was she, after all, to intervene where trained professionals were handling the situation? Ashley's internal struggle was palpable. Every cell in her body screamed for her to act, but her mind was full of restrictions. There, among the white walls and the smell of disinfectant, she was just an employee without authority, without the right to intervene in something so serious. Memories of the countless times she was told to keep her place echoed like a hammer. If she did something wrong, her already fragile career could crumble, and her family depended on her. Meanwhile, time seemed to slow down, and the voice of one of the doctors sounded loud. "She's not responding." Ashley swallowed hard, her hands beginning to tremble. A memory from the past invaded her mind of a poisoning case in her community where someone had nearly died due to a lack of quick intervention. Her grandmother's experience, who had used a natural antidote to save a life, was alive in her memory. But this was the hospital, not her community. Here, the responsibility was different. Fear was an unbearable weight. If she did something wrong, she could not only lose her job but also risk Emma's life. The rules were clear: don't meddle where you're not called. Ashley's gaze turned to Emma, who was struggling to breathe, and the scene broke her heart. But doubts multiplied, telling her it was too risky, that she couldn't take on that kind of responsibility. It was easy to be courageous in thought. In practice, the risks seemed enormous. Ashley took a step back, trying to convince herself that the doctors would find a way. But a small, insistent voice inside her kept questioning. What if they didn't know what she knew? What if, by chance, the natural antidote she knew was the only thing that could make a difference? But acting would be madness. She wasn't a doctor, and her fear of real consequences held her back strongly. Still, something began to change, like a growing warmth in her chest, hard to ignore. The hospital was engulfed in tension. Emma continued to worsen, and the medical team seemed to be racing against time, trying to discover the source of the violent reaction. Ashley struggled with her own emotions, but her grandmother's voice seemed louder. "Trust your wisdom," she could almost hear, as if her grandmother were beside her. It was as if that memory was an invisible mentor, guiding her down a path she was still reluctant to follow. Ashley looked at the emergency room once more, feeling the warmth of the memory transform into a different kind of courage. But even with her grandmother's inspiration, fear persisted. "What if I fail?" she thought, her mind still full of doubts. But what was more terrifying, to try and fail, or not to try and live forever with the guilt? The decision was an internal battle, a duel between logic and heart, and Ashley was in the midst of that silent war. The dilemma that consumed Ashley finally gave way to an impulse of courage she barely knew she had. Her body moved almost on its own, leading her toward the emergency room. She knew she wasn't permitted, but something stronger than fear was guiding her. With hesitant but determined steps, she entered the chaotic environment, her presence catching the attention of a nurse who looked at her with suspicion. "Please, I can help," Ashley said, her voice trembling but with a tone of urgency that couldn't be ignored. The doctors and nurses' looks turned to her, full of questioning and skepticism. A domestic worker offering help in such a serious case? It seemed absurd. But Ashley, with her heart in her throat, quickly explained about her grandmother's natural antidote, the story that had driven her to act. One of the doctors frowned, ready to send her away, but Emma's desperation was an inescapable reminder that time was running out. Hesitation hung in the air. "Are you going to let me try, or shall we see if she can hold on any longer?" Ashley pleaded, her voice laden with a determination that even surprised herself. The doctor hesitated, the dilemma evident on his face, but finally nodded, with no other visible option. Ashley rushed to prepare the improvised antidote, gathering ingredients she knew could neutralize the poisoning. In a hurried corner, she mixed everything with trembling hands, her mind a whirlwind of prayers and formulas she remembered by heart. With hands still trembling but steady, she held the syringe with the mixture and approached Emma. Each step seemed to carry the weight of the world, but Ashley couldn't stop now. She administered the solution into Emma's vein, hoping and praying that her ancestral knowledge would work. The environment became so silent that it was possible to hear the sound of Ashley's heart pounding in her ears. She didn't know what to expect, just prayed that her decision hadn't been in vain. Emma, who was almost on the verge of losing consciousness, gave a slight spasm. What followed was a series of deep breaths, as if her body was finally receiving the air it so desperately needed. The heart monitor began to stabilize, and a wave of relief swept through the room. The doctor looked at Ashley, still skeptical but now visibly impressed. She had crossed the first threshold, risking everything she had, and the result was nothing short of miraculous. But little did Ashley know that was just the beginning. The relief that filled the emergency room was intense but fleeting. Shortly after Emma stabilized, the consequences of Ashley's boldness began to unfold. The hospital chief, a strict and inflexible man, was furious to discover that an unqualified employee had acted so recklessly. He summoned her to an emergency meeting, and despite Ashley's pleas and tears, the decision was ruthless. She was fired. The pain of injustice burned in her chest, but the determination to protect Emma began to grow. Emma, now more conscious, heard about Ashley's intervention and was deeply grateful. But at the same time, what should have been a moment of relief brought a strange and disturbing feeling. Emma found herself thinking about Jonathan, her husband, whose behavior seemed increasingly disconcerting. He had been by her side during dinner, but there was something in his concern that didn't sound genuine. Doubt, like a shadow, began to hover over her. Could Jonathan, the man she blindly trusted, be behind something so sinister? As Emma tried to process her own feelings, Ashley, now unemployed and with an uncertain future, couldn't ignore the instinct telling her that something more was happening. Driven by a sense of responsibility, she began to investigate. She sought information about Emma and Jonathan's marriage, discreetly asking acquaintances and revisiting memories of conversations she had overheard from friends visiting Emma in the hospital. Details that were previously insignificant now seemed suspicious, like rumors about Jonathan's financial troubles. Ashley's search brought to light disturbing secrets. She discovered that Jonathan was facing huge debts and that a substantial life insurance policy had been taken out in Emma's name shortly before the incident. Ashley felt her stomach turn at the extent of the betrayal. It was painful to think that someone could use another person's love as a tool for financial gain, but the evidence began to pile up. She knew she needed to show all of this to Emma, even if the truth was hard to accept. When Ashley finally revealed her discoveries to Emma, the reaction was devastating. Emma was paralyzed, reality crushing everything she thought she knew about her marriage. The idea that the man she loved might want to see her dead was unthinkable, but the evidence was before her. The happy memories now seemed like blurs, and her trust in Jonathan began to crumble. Fear and sadness were replaced by a growing desire for justice, but they knew that facing the situation would require even more courage. The shock of the truth still reverberated in Emma's heart, but there was no more time for hesitation. The trust she once placed in Jonathan now seemed like a collapsing house of cards. Emma and Ashley began to devise a plan to expose Jonathan's dark intentions, but the task was daunting. There were real dangers, and the fear that he would discover their investigations hovered over them like a threatening cloud. Ashley delved even deeper into the investigation, tracking documents, seeking help from people who knew the couple, and even asking questions in places she would normally never dare to enter. Every detail she found painted a more sinister picture of Jonathan. He was calculative, manipulative, and his impeccable charm was just a facade. Ashley knew that the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous the path became. But her determination was unwavering. Emma needed protection, and she would do whatever was necessary. Emma, for her part, struggled to stay calm while living under the same roof as the man who might have planned her death. Jonathan acted strangely normal, as if nothing had happened, which made everything even more disturbing. Every smile he gave seemed like a reminder of the imminent danger. Emma knew she had to continue playing the role of the faithful wife, even though every moment beside him was a test of endurance. The pain of betrayal tore her apart inside, but the will to survive was stronger. The tension between the two women only grew, but an unbreakable bond of sisterhood began to form. Emma never imagined that someone like Ashley, a simple hospital worker who had risked everything, would become her most faithful ally. Together, they supported each other, drawing strength in moments of despair. Their determination was a beacon in the darkness, but the cave of truth seemed to deepen with each passing day. When Ashley found one last piece of evidence, the situation became even more serious. She discovered that Jonathan was trying to cover up his actions, paying people to erase traces and ensuring that Emma had no way out. It was the final confirmation. He knew they were getting closer. With danger approaching ever more, Emma and Ashley needed to act quickly. Emma and Ashley prepared themselves, gathering all the evidence they had managed to collect, and mustered the courage to confront Jonathan. The police station, with its flashing lights and a tense atmosphere, became the stage for the showdown. Jonathan arrived unsuspecting, his face still displaying that charming smile that had deceived so many people. But Emma now saw beyond the facade, and the anger mixed with fear was a fuel that kept her steady. When Jonathan realized he was being confronted, his eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise, soon replaced by a calculative look. He tried to dodge, to play charm and manipulation, as he had done so many times before. "Emma, this is absurd," he said, his voice silky. But this time, Emma wouldn't be fooled. She held the evidence in her hand, documents and recordings that exposed his sordid intentions. Jonathan realized that the lies were collapsing, and a shadow of fury crossed his face. Ashley remained by Emma's side, her presence like a pillar of support. Even without experience with confrontations or such dangerous situations, she knew she needed to be strong. The two women looked at each other, and a silent understanding passed between them. Jonathan was cornered, and like a wild animal, it was impossible to predict what he would do next. The police watched attentively, waiting for the confession that would end that nightmare. But Jonathan was not the type to surrender easily. With the tension reaching its peak, Jonathan made one last desperate attempt to reverse the situation, trying to discredit Emma, to shift the blame anywhere but himself. But the evidence was undeniable, and the witnesses Ashley had found were called to give their testimonies. Jonathan's lies were dissipating like mist in the sun, and the man who once seemed so powerful was now nothing more than an unmasked criminal. It was a moment of bitter victory, but the danger had not yet passed. When Jonathan was finally handcuffed, a mix of relief and pain overwhelmed Emma. The betrayal was still an open wound, but there was something deeply liberating in seeing him taken away. Ashley, beside her, let out a heavy sigh, as if only now could she feel the weight lifting from her shoulders. They had won a battle, but they knew the path to healing and renewal would be long. Emma's gaze was marked by sadness but also by newfound strength. And thus, a new chapter of their lives was about to begin. With Jonathan now behind bars, Emma felt the first glimpse of freedom, like a fresh breeze after a suffocating storm. She still carried the scars of betrayal, but there was a new strength within her, something blossoming from the pain. Ashley, even without a job and with an uncertain future, felt that something profound had also changed in her life. Together, the two women began to dream of something greater, something that could transform suffering into purpose. It was on a sunny afternoon, while sitting on a park bench, that the idea arose. Emma spoke about how she would like to help other women facing similar situations, victims of abuse and toxic relationships. Ashley, her eyes lit up, talked about the sisterhood she had learned in her community, about the power of women supporting each other. Thus was born the plan to found the NGO Safe Haven, a safe refuge for those who needed protection and renewal. The project brought an unexpected renewal to both. Emma used her influence and resources to bring Safe Haven to life, while Ashley brought her determination and knowledge to create something truly meaningful. The first event of the NGO was full of stories of overcoming and solidarity, and the impact was immediate. Women who felt invisible now had a space to be heard and welcomed, and the atmosphere was one of hope. Every smile, every shared hug was a victory, a promise of a better future. Emma emerged from the shadows of her old life with a strength she never imagined possessing. The experience of almost losing everything, her health, her sense of security, even her faith in love, transformed her irreversibly. She was no longer the woman who hid behind rehearsed smiles and a perfect life. Now, she dedicated herself to helping other women find their own strength, using Safe Haven as a platform for change. Emma's resurrection was not just a matter of survival, it was a metamorphosis, a rebirth. Beside her, Ashley also found a new version of herself. The fear that used to control her was now a distant memory. Saving Emma and fighting for justice had ignited something powerful in her heart. She saw herself not just as a survivor, but as a warrior. Even without the hospital job, she found an even more meaningful path alongside Emma. They became advocates for women without a voice, ensuring that no one else would go through what Emma had faced alone. There were nights when Emma still woke up from nightmares, the sensation of the poison suffocating her still vivid in her mind. The emotional pain of knowing that Jonathan, the man who had promised to love her, wanted to see her destroyed, was a wound that took time to heal. Even so, each new day was proof that she had survived, that the past could no longer define her future. She had learned to forgive herself, to love herself again. The impact of their actions began to echo beyond the limits of the NGO. Emma and Ashley were invited to share their stories, to inspire other women to rise against abuse and protect themselves from toxic relationships. They became symbols of renewal and determination, showing that even the deepest scars can give way to something beautiful. Emma finally found a purpose that went beyond herself, and this brought a sense of peace that neither luxury nor status could offer. Safe Haven became a vibrant community, proving that sisterhood is not just a concept, but a force capable of changing the world. And as the sun set over the city, Emma and Ashley met once again in the park, now as inseparable friends and co-founders of something that could change lives forever. They sat side by side, the silence between them full of understanding. The battle with Jonathan had ended, but their mission was just beginning. "Do you think we did enough?" Emma asked, her voice soft but laden with meaning. Ashley smiled, looking at the horizon. "Enough for today. Tomorrow we continue." And with that, they stayed there, two souls who had faced the worst and emerged stronger, ready for the next chapter of their lives, with renewed hope and determination.